Hi, everyone, and welcome to another session of our Plan D, What to Do After the PhD series that we've been running here at the Comparative Literature Institute of the University of Porto. We're going to be having another chat with Marie Pier Boucher from the University of Toronto about research practices and writing habits and whatnot. I'm just going to read the information that Marie has on her page at the University of Toronto, and so you guys can get to know her a little bit. She got a PhD in art history and visual studies from Duke University, and then was a postdoc at MIT, and now holds an assistant professor position. He's an assistant professor at the University of Toronto. Her research focuses on the design of habitats for sustaining life in extreme environments. She is currently working on a book project which looks at the relationship between health, architectural design, and perceptual activity in a range of extreme environments, physical and symbolic, to examine how the changes in direction and orientation induced by levitation and microgravity can inform the design of Earth-based habitats. She's also working on an umbrella project called Interplanetary Habitation, the Earth, the Moon, Mars, and the City, which investigates the socio-technical future of planetary life in relation to growing concerns over health and biotechnology, mobility, and artificial intelligence. Welcome, Marie Pier. Very interesting stuff. So, the first thing I wanted to ask you is as I was saying, we were having a chat just before we went live, and so the first thing I wanted to ask is how you got interested in these topics in the first place. Like why bioart, and then why did bioart lead you to investigate these relationships between architecture and science and whatnot, which you, I believe, explored in your PhD dissertation.
Yeah, well, first, thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here. I wish I had this opportunity when I was a student to chat with people who are going through similar experiences. So, of course, the answer to that might be a long answer. When I was an undergrad, actually, I enrolled in a project in public health. We went to Cuba and we did the information campaign on dengue fever. So my first introduction to real research or academic research was in the field of public health. And I sustained this kind of this form of practice in my master's research. Before to engage in my master's, I went to Africa and I did in Mali, and I work in information campaigns about depigmentation. So people who use products to clear their skin or whiten their skin. So, and then when I was doing the research, I became kind of unsatisfied with the process. So I felt that the methodologies I was using were coming straight from the hard sciences, but we're not very sensitive to social or economic or cultural transformation. So the way I arrived into bioart is that I enrolled in my master's thinking that I would continue this kind of information campaigns for social development. And then I went to see a conference by Steve Kurtz at the Montreal Center for Contemporary Art Museum. And then he said something like, even though it's true or not, he said, because it was in the anthrax kind of saga in the United States. And he was saying, and whether his statement was true or not, this is what triggered me to go to bioart. He said, most people in the world die of tuberculosis, malaria, things that we can actually prevent or, stop, right? And he said, right now, most of the budget in the United States is going towards anthrax. So then he said, we need artists to engage with that. So then I started saying, oh, this is it. Art is going to help me to get out of these methodologies, which I feel are not very attuned to the environment or social or cultural concerns. So that's how I went to bioart. And yeah, that's it. So then at the beginning, I was supposed to do my master's in social development, and I moved towards the analysis of the artificial uterus. So it was a big jump. But so I still continued the kind of health concerns that I was, but trying to look at health more, not something that can be quantified or measured, but as something that can be lived or experienced. So art enabled me to kind of make this jump in the methodology.
But it's so that actually I didn't know. So you were actually not in the humanities in the first place, right? So you made that transition only in the PhD, right?
No, I was actually like my undergrad and my master's are it's a weird thing. It's called communication science. So it's officially a bachelor and a master of science, but it's only because the department emerged out of psychology that it's master of science. It's just it's an institutional thing. So I was not I think communication science is halfway between social science and the humanities. So of course I was already there, but it's just that the formation I received to get ready for my field work in Africa and in Cuba, I felt that the methodologies were very coming from the hard sciences. So yeah.
And then so one interesting thing that I also noticed about your trajectory is that even when you were doing while you were doing the PhD, you were, I believe, also in touch with all of these different institutions around the world, right? So I believe you went, for example, to Symbiotica, right, in Australia, and then you spent some time over here as well, right? We were talking about it in Alentejo, right? So how did that contribute to also the formation of the idea, right? The big idea for your dissertation, right? Did all of this, I guess, networking, I believe, is maybe what you did there as well, right? So you got to know all these people in a way.
Yeah, it's the odd thing between networking and necessity, if you like. So it could be looked at someone who just wants to create a network of connections. And I think going just for the network is the wrong way of doing it. You need to develop a net. I think the network emerges out of like the way you do your research. So I went to Symbiotica because I wanted to study the practice of the two artists there. So what I do in my work, like I think I kind of have an intuition and I follow the materiality. So my work in the master's level brought me to Symbiotica. And then I met all these people, made all these connections. And of course, being able that was at the master level. So for me, being able at the master level to engage with like top artists, top researchers across science, the humanities, the arts, and the social science was one of the most powerful thing. I was like a baby to a certain extent, and I was like immersed in this kind of super sharp environment. So of course it was challenging at the beginning because when you're a master student and then you're confronted with like full-time professors in biology who ask you what your research is about, then you need to figure out a way to convey a message, so you have it makes you go faster. So, and there, of course, at Symbiotica, this is where I met a lot of the people in the bioart community that, then Marta and then other people. So like it's a matter then you follow the people that you work with, right? So, so it's a matter of like following your research, and then the research will make you meet the good people, I think. And then, of course, your ideas gel through these conversations. So right. Yeah, of course. And also like for me in academia, I have to say that I find the academic world very difficult. And hanging out with artists is what saves my life at the end of the day, right? We don't have the same obligations or the same concerns. So when I'm kind of mad or sad, if I complain to them, they don't really care because they don't have, it's not the same for them. So like, it's kind of a family. It's like my refugee camp, if you like, academic refugee camp. The artists, they help me to want to continue this work, right?
Right. Yeah. I see. So then going back to the idea, right, that you then pursued in the PhD, like how did you decide to focus on like architecture and science, right? Was this something that came out of the like seminars you were taking as well, or again, as you were saying, maybe was already something you were working on during the MA, and through all of this context that you made across the world. And how did you decide to focus on that in particular, right?
Well, there's a real a cause effect link here. So when I was doing my master's, when I was finishing my master's, I was studying the practice of around cats and neonates who do tissue culture. So I was comparing the bioreactor. So a bioreactor is an artificial environment that reproduces natural growth conditions. So if you want to grow, let's say like a finger, an organ or something, this is the apparatus or infrastructure that you use. And one of the main concerns that they were saying is that even though the hype of tissue culture, for instance, you cannot really grow big things, you know, because they collapse and then there's problems of blood clotting and stuff like that. So one of the kind of biggest constraints that they face were like, they were saying that one of the hardest things is to reproduce gravity conditions, you know. And then I started thinking, what would it mean to put a bioreactor in outer space? So this is how I got to outer space. It's really a direct link. And then I started to figure this out. You know, it's like, it was an intuition I got. I was like, and it makes it makes sense for some people, but it's also like a nonsense proposition. But then I started to question how the space catalyzes health. You know, like what are the conditions that you need? So I started really realizing that the milieu or the environment or the associated milieu was really important, you know, in the way we conceptualize life. So this is where I moved to really understanding these as extreme environments to sustain life. And I'm not exactly sure. I started to hang out in like venues that show space art, and then I met some other people from other institutions, and then this is how it, you know, so I followed my intuition, and it brought me to like doing field research at the Johnson Space Center and NASA Johnson Space Center in Texas.
Still during the PhD? During the PhD,
I did my field research there. So this kind of turned into the kind of bringing the bioreactor to outer space brought me to study how astronauts orient themselves in microgravity conditions and how this might undo our assumptions about how we orient on Earth, you know. Right. So the idea for me is a little bit to see that the space we live in have an effect on our health. And so like, how do we want to sustain or nourish or nurture this relation?
Right. No, but it's for sure, you know, a very interesting trajectory, what you describe, you know, from going to, you know, just hanging out with bioartists to then realizing that, you know, you have this kind of cookie intuition that you know, that might lead to a really interesting project or maybe not, right? And then you, as you said, right, like then you started hanging out with, you know, people doing space art and what. So that seems to be a very non-linear trajectory, right, to this idea that you then went on to explore in your postdoc, I believe, as well, right? Like when you went to
my first postdoc at McGill, I expanded that into like looking more specifically at levitation and the kind of practices outside of the science, if you like, you know, non-modern practices, if you like, that also give us insight about the feeling of what would it mean to feel that you're levitating in space. So I did that in my first postdoc, and then in the second postdoc, I kind of continued that, but thinking more about a project of interplanetary habitation. So I moved away a little bit from the human body, perhaps now to the city, actually. Like, so I went back looking really at what it would mean to bring this into a project of interplanetary habitation. And then one of the things that I realized with space is that it's one thing to leave the Earth, but like, what about if you want to come back? So I kind of do a round trip in this new project where I leave the Earth, I go to the moon, to Mars, and then I come back in the city to really like kind of see what is the material implications of this journey.
Wow, I mean, this is, I believe, what a new book, right? That you're preparing, right? Or
this is good.
Planetary habitation.
Up to now, it's more papers. It might turn into a book later, but right now I'm working on this book about the experience of microgravity and our experience of time. So I kind of retook part of my PhD, but it got rid of some parts of it too, and I'm going to put into a book. And then other parts of my PhD I'm turning into articles. So Yeah.
Oh, no, but let's talk a little bit about that, because that's really cool. That's really interesting. So you did get rid of some of the chapters in the PhD, right? That maybe didn't fit this particular project, right? That about microgravity.
So for me, what I found actually myself difficult when you do a PhD is that you have this like amazing journey, right? Where you have these seminars and you go to all these conferences and you meet these like amazing scholars and like you have your peers. Like it's really like it's one of the best time of the academic life, might be the best time actually. But then when you get to writing, you're already somewhere else, right? You did the whole process. So you have to write, you have to go back to explain how you got there. And this is quite difficult sometimes, right? So for me, what happened is that I did this process, but then at the end, I realized that perhaps some parts of this process are not necessary anymore for this argument that I'm trying to make, right? It was necessary for me to do this journey to get there, but perhaps for the book, these things don't have to be there. There's another tendency that emerges. So I always keep in mind, when I was doing my PhD, I met an editor at Duke, Ken Wisaker, who told me something very interesting. And he actually, if some of you are interested, he sometimes gives a talk about how to transform your dissertation into a book from an editor's perspective. And the thing that he told me was like, there's a big difference between writing a PhD for your committee and writing a book for an editor. He said, your PhD committee accepts to read your dissertation before it's written. Nobody will accept to publish your book before it's written. So there is also like a difference in how you address yourself, the comments you will get, the kind of review. So the process is quite different. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you also, just to pick on something you said, you did throw away these parts that no longer fit, but you are also turning them into articles, right? Nonetheless, right? So you're not really just throwing them away, right? You managed to figure out how to, convert them into, something publishable and whatnot, which is what might happen to, a lot of people, right? Even though, what you also hear, a lot is people recommending that you turn your entire thing into articles, right? That also might be a way to do it, right? Like if you don't really have a strong, maybe a strong topic for a book, right? Maybe a good way around it is to also just parse it out into articles and just publish it.
I think there's not one way, right?
Right.
I think there's multiple ways of doing. So like my colleague at MIT, Stefan Elmreich, he always tells us that you should only you shouldn't publish more than one chapter of your dissertation into an article to make sure that you have enough for a book, right? Other people will say, I don't care about a book, I want many articles. So some institutions don't have the same kind of requirements for tenure, for instance, but I think if you feel that you have a book project, you should pursue I think the problem is trying to make your research fit in pre-existing categories, right? So I think if you're trying to say, I want to do these articles, but it doesn't work with your so like it's a matter for you to negotiate that. And it's also a very difficult process because you're like, okay, if I take this part out, then what kind of argument do I get out at the same time? Do I still have enough in what is left there? So it's a constant negotiation process, and it's not easy.
No, I also wanted to ask you, just in general, how you went about, like, after you got out of the PhD, and maybe even while you were still a PhD student, how did you manage your publications? Did you already have in mind that, okay, I need to write an article for, let's say, one of the best journals or something like that? And did you already have, let's say, a chapter that really fit into that sort of trajectory?
It's really funny because the way it worked for me, it mainly worked with invitations. So most of the things I published was through invitation. So like someone I met in a conference who saw my talk, who invited me to propose something for like a journal they're editing or things like that. So yeah, most of the stuff I do, or it's like I propose, like right now I have a book project that I just proposed to editors that I have been working with in the past, right? So I know that we have a good conversation going. So so it's a matter of finding the people you want to work with, the people who will give you the good feedback to. Like, you know, it's not just a matter of you don't want your book to come out and feel totally like alienated from the process, right?
Right.
So it's important that you find a good publisher, the people who want to work with you, but that you also want to work with them. So I think pre-imposing limits or objectives might actually transfigure the process, right? I think it's a matter of finding the good niche for your thing. And it's difficult, of course, because there's so much pressure in academia that it's difficult to kind of not try to fit in pre-existing ways of doing.
No, but that's really interesting. The fact that you're saying that most of because you know the idea, let's say the idea we have, especially over here, right? That now that everything has become very, you know, mathematical, right? That people expect you to. I don't think that's how it works in Canada, or at least not in the US, right? In the US, people will maybe look at the publisher where, you know, a certain article or book is, you know, coming from, but they don't really have metrics, right? In the States, right? I believe that's not the case, right?
I'm not sure about the metrics, but I know about the pressure, though.
Right.
That it's calculated in metrics or not, I think the effect is the same.
But here's the thing, right? Like that we still have, at least over here, right, the idea that, you know, that you know, publishing has to be, right, the very you know, solitary, isolated process, right, in which you write an article, you then send it out to, you know, be peer reviewed by, you know, whatever journal, and only then, right, is your research validated, and, you know, will you be able to apply for jobs. But the kind of process you're describing is very different, right? Because you know, in a way, I mean, not saying, of course, that, you know, the you know, the articles that you wrote were not peer reviewed or whatever, right? Didn't go through that process. But then what you're describing is that you sort of already know a particular venue for this thing, right? This thing that you're writing, right? Through having talked to other people in conferences and whatnot, right?
Yeah, but I think it's kind of natural as a process, right? Because you write to a community of people, right? So when you write your paper, you're addressing yourself to people. So when you go to conferences, you meet these people. So they become your interlocutors. So they want to sustain the conversation. So I think it's not just a matter of like finding all the great conferences and making sure people come to your talk, but it's a way that to really have in mind who you are talking to. What kind of community do you want? What kind of discussion do you want to have, right? So I think this is the departure point of a collaboration. And I think the idea that it has to be alone and painful is something I'm trying to go against, right? I understand it's really working like that most of the time, but I've been in the last 2 years working a lot with a colleague of mine, Alice Jarry at Concordia University, and we've been developing techniques that we work together. We write together, we try to, and it might be a little bit more difficult but to do when you do it, but actually you feel much less isolated. Right. So I think we need to invent techniques that this kind of academic isolation is, you know, myself, I don't promote that at all. And I don't think it's healthy either.
Right.
You know, I think it's kind of weird that we're asking for new forms of collectivities and relationships, and we do that alone in our little office. So, you know, like myself, I want to think of the kind of propositions I'm formulating. I want to think that they're also an ethos, you know, that, you know, not for them, but I materialize them in the way I behave, right? In my home, when I go outside, you know, so yeah.
No, absolutely. But like, again, I believe that at least over here, but I think it's a more general thing, right? That people do still have, you know, an issue with working, you know, with other people, right? Let's say, you know, writing articles together, that's not very common here at all, right? Like to write an article in the humanities, especially in humanities, right? Maybe in the sciences or in sociology.
Yeah, in the science, it's more social science. I think it's more common.
But you know, in the humanities, definitely not something that is encouraged, right?
It's also, I think it's also coming from the institution. Institutions want you to have single author paper in top journals. So it's, you know, so for me, it's a matter of saying, yes, I want to accept what the institution is asking me to do, but at the same time, I want to be part of the institution that so I don't want to say, oh, my institution is bad. Oh, you know, I don't want to have this kind of like antagonism, right? So I'm part of the institution that I complain about to a certain extent. So if I want this culture to be changed, I need to actively work on making the conditions for these changes to happen, right? So to a certain extent, I refuse to see myself as some sort of victim having to do this. And so like, perhaps I won't get my tenure, right? But, you know, I think we need to be able to put ourselves at risk, like to risk our own practice. And so that's why for me, it's really an ethos, right?
No, and it is, as you said, right? Like it is, you know, sure, there's also like a political side to it, but also it's just more fun, maybe, right? Also more fun and more, and healthier, right? As you are also suggesting, to, you know, to work with other people. I mean, I've been doing it for a while as well, right? It is writing articles with friends, right? It's something that I really enjoy doing. It is not easy. I can tell you that. I mean, and then you were
you have to choose the friends, right? Because some friends, they might help you go faster, and others, they might make you go much slower. So you have to choose the people you write with. Yeah.
That's right. It definitely not easy, but it is a very rewarding, you know, experience, because you do get to, you know, talk about something, you know, you know, more often and whatnot. And yeah, you know, even though sure it is not valued with the same weight, right, as a single author paper, but as you were saying, right, that's not all that matters anyway, right? And you can write maybe more, you know, you can write faster maybe if you write collaboratively, right? So you can write maybe more papers in the
yeah, perhaps. But it's also, I think it's a matter of, you know, we don't own the knowledge we produce, right? So like, I mean, we have to be able to let go to a certain extent, right? We cannot make ourselves own, we don't own the knowledge we produce. So I think for me, at least, it's not just about going against the pressure of academia, it's also refusing that an institution will tell me how to produce research. Of course, your institution gives you your funding, your institution gets you your paycheck and all of this, right? But I think we have to be careful at not having external criteria of analysis impinging on the research we do, right? The criteria of analysis should emerge out of the research rather than coming from external points of view. And of course, this is hard to negotiate, but I think, you know, myself, I want to believe it's possible. So
right. Or at least you can, again, like strike a balance between, you know, doing what you're being asked to do and try to, you know, also. And we here at the Comparative Literature Institute that I work for, right, we do that in a very clear way, right, in the sense that we have like a straight academic journal, right, in which, you know, people are supposed to write in a very, you know, scientific way or in a very traditional way. And then we have we have, I believe, two like more experimental journals in which the same people that write for the other, you know, publication, right, write in a very different way and write collaboratively and write in a, let's say, a less academic, less scientific way, right, more exploratory, more like essayistic sort of writing, right? And that those two are those two are important, right? Even if, again, like even if the more exploratory writing that you do is not going to be valued at all, right, by funders or by but it's still going to be read, right, by the same people. So,
it depends, because like it depends which field you're in. So for instance, myself, I'm across like communication, culture, and technology, which is my own base at the University of Toronto, but I'm also in STS and also research creation. So for instance, like last year, I exhibited at the Pompidou Center with a group of people from a research project in research creation. If I was based in the arts department, it would be big bucks, right? It would be like the equivalent of being like published in the top journal. But because I'm not in the arts, it's like exhibiting in some sort of like venue, like a small venue, nothing very important. So it really depends on the context, right? So if you're in English and your job is creative writing, you better have published in creative journal rather than in more academic or traditional things, right? So that's why I'm saying there's no one way of doing. Everybody creates their own path. And I think in academia, it's a matter of making yourself valuable for your institution rather than showing the institution that you have the value that they're looking for. You can create more value within your institution. That's why I'm saying it's important to feel that we are part of our institution, that we participate in the materialization of the institution. Of course, we want to, I don't think I would change much in the institution where I'm based, but I want to believe that one little gesture might be relayed by someone else and then relayed by someone else, and maybe in 10 years, something will change, right? But it's a matter of saying that, wanting to, how do you keep your mojo, right? How do you not let this kind of pressure prevents you from being the creative scholar that you can be? I think this is the most important thing, like then perhaps don't find a job in academia, do something else, but at least be happy, right? So no, but I'm just saying, I think at the end of the day, like, bending in front of an institution is not really a graceful gesture.
Yeah, no. And again, like to go with what you were, I mean, we started our conversation. When we started our conversation, you were saying that, it was an intuition that led you to all of these places, right? So it wasn't really, planned or anything like that. And and that's a really valuable lesson. What one thing that previous guests that I've been on this show have said is precisely that, right? That when they applied, let's say, for funding from the European Union or something like that, it's not that they, were designing a project to fit that particular, funding scheme in particular. It's that they already had a very strong interest in a particular topic, right? And so that's what led them to design this big thing, right? And so it wasn't planned either, right? So it's mostly about like sticking to your interests and really not the other way around, I think, is what's
finding ways to make people interested in what you're interested. You create a community of interest, not convince people that want people. I think it's more a community of interest, but yeah,
community of interest. Yeah. All right. One other thing I wanted to ask you is, that I've been asking other guests as well, is just about like how you go about writing, right? Because writing is, I guess, the most difficult part of, or one of them, one of the most difficult parts of what we do, right? Do you, and it's something that people don't tend to talk about. Like, it's as if it magically happens, right? It just appears.
It doesn't.
So how do you do it, right? Like, do you have, let's say, a routine in which you like write every day? You go to a particular cafe or office, or not now because you can't leave the house, right? Right. But back in the day, when you were a free agent,
I need myself. Some people say they need a space to work. Myself, it's not so much the space and the time. So I find it very difficult to squeeze 2 hours of writing here and 2 hours of writing there. I feel that I want to know that I don't have to think about what I'm going to cook for dinner, or so when I wrote my PhD, I locked myself in a house and I never went out for like 4 months. I stayed there from morning to night, and I loved it. Some people dislike it, but I like the hermit part of writing, like, you know, but really isolating yourself. Like, I feel like I'm going to Mars. I'm on my own Mars module, you know, and nobody can come and disturb me. And when I get to that, then I can really feel that let go and kind of engage with my writing. So this is, for me, what I find the most difficult is when we teach, you know, it's difficult to, I don't want to squeeze 1 hour of writing as it's a task to accomplish, even though it's that too. You know, I want to sustain this kind of love for my writing. I don't want to feel, you know, and so I want to give myself these conditions. So for me, the ideal condition is like, I'm Jacques Derrida a little bit in that way. I like to write in my pajamas. So, I like to like just stay inside, you know, like, and, you know, I mean, my favorite writing environment is actually my bed.
Really?
So this is very personal.
Very
but
nice.
So yeah, I just, you know, and for me, it's a matter of like, you know, I can eat like peanut butter on toast for like 3 days. I don't care, you know, as long as I have lots of coffee.
Right.
So this is my idea. So like some people will, and also like another thing it's environmental conditions too. I prefer when it's sunny outside. This is
right.
kind of weird, but
yeah. you're staying inside, but it's the weather's nice at least, right?
Yes. Right. There's something about like a positive engagement, you know, the sun kind of radiates positive energy. There's something, you know, I'm not really esoteric in that sense, but this is the kind of, so my ideal environment would be like, my ideal place would be like a bedroom in the middle of nowhere, okay, with internet connection though, and lots of coffee.
But these days, do you like say, you can do that during the weekend maybe, or during, you know, the winter break or the summer break, because you're saying that you need like a continuous you know, period of uninterrupted time for writing, right? Not, you don't like to
well, I hope that in the long run I'm able to integrate this kind of routine of writing in a more sustained way on a daily basis. But usually what I do is that I use my weekends for that, or the winter break or the spring break, so that, you know, at least I know that if someone sends me an email on Saturday morning, I can wait until Monday to respond. So this, you know, like I need this kind of space of freedom to feel that I can actually engage with my writing. So yeah.
And do you like also like wait until you have all of the ideas in place before you start writing, or do you write and the ideas come while you're writing, right? Do you use the writing process itself to discover stuff, right, or no?
Well, there is part of that, but my first gesture for writing usually is that I have some sort of a negative, and the first gesture is negative usually. Like I'm angry at something. I heard something in a conference. I heard this guy say something that I can't stand, or and then I start by like bashing, you know, and then I write this very negative, and then like it feels good. I feel like, you know, I'm getting out, you know, and then like the day after when I read it, every time I'm like, oh my God, you're so out, you know. So I just, but this kind of, it's a necessity. I feel it's necessary for me to first kill some darlings and then be able to engage constructively with something, right? So I need, and then once I've passed through this first step, then I can actually discover stuff, right? I remember when sometimes you write, I'm sure it happened to you during your PhD or your master's, you write something and then you reread it 2 years after, so you're like, hey, it's me, I wrote that, really? Because you get so immersed. So it's kind of nice when you get this, well, sometimes perhaps you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I wrote this, you know, but when it's positive, it's great. So yeah, I need to first have this negative or theory bashing. I'm not sure how I could call it.
Yeah, fair enough. No, I mean, also the environmental conditions that you described are very, I mean, it's very useful to see that. I mean, in bed, right? You were saying, writing in bed. I remember I used to be able to do that. Not anymore, but I used to be able to write. Maybe during my MA, I used to be able to write in bed. Nowadays, no. I mean, it really. I remember the time I was more productive recently. I really had a routine in which I woke up at 7 or whatever, had breakfast, and then just sat down and wrote for a while, right? But it seems to
for my PhD, it was my routine. I would wake up around 7, start writing at 7:15, and the highlight of my day would be to take a shower. It was like that, you know.
And you just wrote the entire day, right? You're saying that
every
the whole
day
day
for 10 to 12 hours a day, like, and
very nice.
But this was really like amazing because I really got, that was the only thing I was really immersed in my thing, you know. But then I was finding it very hard to have normal conversations with people. You know, I had nothing to talk about, and I didn't want to tell them about my dissertation, so I had very reduced social contacts, which was great, actually. I think it's important that you accept that there's kind of a ritual of writing the PhD that you really need to, like, you know, dedicate your time to that, right?
Right. No, I mean, because, you know, a lot of people, lots of friends of mine really needed to, let's say, instead of staying in the house, right? They really needed to, let's say, get dressed as if they were gonna go to work, and then go to a, you know, dissertation workshop or whatever, right? In which they, you know, other people were there to peer pressure them into writing the dissertation, right? So yeah, I mean, the way I did it was more or less similar to what you're describing, right? The difference being that I kind of, you know, just thought about all I wanted to say before I started writing, and then I you know, did all the writing in like a week or something like that for each of the chapters, right? No, not for all of the dissertation, but for each of the chapters. That's
yeah, well, I think there are different strategies, and you know, you can write one article in one way, another in another way. So
yeah.
But I think the most important is to keep the joy, you know, like should be something pleasurable, right? I understand the pressure, the conditions, the obligations, but you know, I mean, there's no point of turning this into torture, right?
Yeah.
But as my PhD supervisor used to tell me, it's never going to be as bad as writing the PhD. And he was right.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, that's true. So one last question, Marie, I wanted to ask you, you know, looking back, was there something you wish you had known, right, when you were, you know, where you were starting the PhD, or when you were still, you know, a young researcher? Not that you're not a young researcher anymore.
Yeah, you think I'm old?
Younger researcher. Is there something you wish you had known in advance, right, before you got to this stage of the career? No.
Well, for me, it was a journey, right? So it was a series of learning, failures, successes, you know, and it was a journey. So, and of course, some parts of it were bad. Others were like amazingly good. So I'm not sure. I think if I would have known the stuff, like I would have like behaved in the way to prevent. So like, I think I was able to just remain very, how did I say, what's the word in French? I can't even find the word, but it's just like not having something very clear to accomplish, right? It's just like reacting on the spot. So following your intuition, following your guts, you know. So knowing things in advance and strategize. I remember like in my PhD exams, one of my committee members told me that I was really not a strategic student. And I took it as a compliment, right? But it's a matter of, you know, I think if you know in advance and you like, or, you know, like if you force something, it doesn't work, right? And it's normal to fail at the PhD level, you know. When you join the job market, it's excruciating. It's really difficult. Right. You know, I had a colleague when I was doing my postdoc who applied to 72 postdocs and jobs in 1 year, you know, and then she had a contest with her friend. They would have like rejection parties, right? How many rejections did you get this week? So turn this into an adventure rather than the torture, you know.
Right.
But it's a very difficult milieu, and it never stops. Once you get your job, you need to get the tenure, and then you need to get the full professor, and then you want course release, and then you want more funding. So it's not something that ends. It's an endless journey. So that's why it's important to like what you do and have fun, and surround yourself by people you care for and care for you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Marie. And I'll see you in Portugal, hopefully.
Yes, I hope so.
You know,
I'm coming to Portugal. Actually, I'm going to teach at the International Space University this coming summer. So I'll be in Lisbon for that. Yes.
The international, say again, the international what? Space?
International Space University. It's a university based in Strasbourg in France that offers masters in space studies. So it's like an immersive program that lasts for like 6 weeks or something. And then you have a master's in space science.
My. And you're going to be in Lisbon. Man, maybe I'll see you there. That sounds very cool. So, but drop by to say hello here.
Well, good luck, everybody. Thanks. Okay,
thanks, Marie. Thank you very much.
Ciao.
Bye. See ya.